How many people here have seen Hamilton? Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Okay. So for those of you who haven't, you're going to see an excerpt of a couple of the songs. And these singers you're about to hear are phenomenal. So since the show runs about 2 hours and 45 minutes, we're not doing all of it. This is Act 1. This is what I'm calling our Act 1. And it is some of the core principles that really have elevated me. Right? So, who was Alexander Hamilton? And besides being the guy on the $10 bill and our first Treasury Secretary. But most importantly, why should we care? And why should we spend a whole Sunday talking about Hamilton? Well, he was one of the most unlikely founding fathers. He was George Washington's chief of staff during the war and started the Treasury Department and the very institutions of Wall Street. But much more than that, he was a poor, orphaned immigrant from the Caribbean who used the sheer force of his will and his intellect to change our country forever and to change how you and I understand liberty and democracy. Alexander Hamilton is one of this country's unsung heroes. He embodies the American ideal of hard-working immigrant success and the spiritual principles that anything is possible if you see it with your mind's eye, feel it and believe it in your heart, and commit to its manifestation with your whole being.
How does a bastard orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean, by providence impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar?
The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a self-starter, by being a lot smarter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trading chart.
And every day while slaves were slaughtered and carted away across the waves, he struggled and kept his guard. Inside he was longing for something to be a part. The brother was ready to beg, still borrow a pardon.
When a hurricane came and devastation reigned, our man saw his future dripping down the drain. Put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain, and he worded his first refrain, a testament to his pain.
Well, the word got around, they said this kid is insane, man. Took up a collection just to send it to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came, and the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man?
Alexander Hamilton. My name is Alexander Hamilton. And there's a million things I haven't done, but just you wait, just you wait.
His father's split, full of it, dead, ridden 2 years later. See Alexander's mother, bedridden, half dead, sitting in their own sick, the scent thick.
And Alex got better, but his mother went quick. Moving with a cousin, the cousin committed suicide. Left him with nothing but ruined pride, something new inside, a voice saying, Alex, you gotta fend for yourself. He started retreating and reading every treatise on the shelf.
There would have nothing left to do for someone less astute. He would have been dead and destitute without a cent of restitution. Started working for his slave mother's landlord, drinking sugar cane and rum and all the things he can't afford. Scanning for every book he can get his hands on, planning for the future. See him now as he stands on the bow of a ship, headed for a new land in New York, UK.
died for him.
Me, I trusted him. I loved him.
And me, I'm the damn fool that shot him.
There's a million things I haven't done, but just you wait.
What's your name, man?
Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton was born on the island of Nevis. Nevis is a beautiful and colorful volcanic island in the Caribbean. But the day-to-day reality of his life was very brutal and violent. Like most Caribbean islands at the time, it was dominated by sugar and cotton plantations. And most people in America think of the slave trade as going from Africa to North America, where in the reality, most of the slave trade went to the Caribbean. Hamilton was right in the middle of this market. Even people in Nevis who were not terribly well off could afford 1 or 2 slaves. And so at the time, Alexander's family did as well. Hamilton's mother, Rachel, fled an unhappy marriage right before she met James Hamilton. And under the terms of her divorce, she was unable to marry, which meant Hamilton and his brother grew up illegitimate, which was a huge thing in those days. Subsequently, Alexander went through some difficult times before he got off the islands. When he was 11, his father, James, abandoned his mother, Rachel, and her 2 sons on the island of St. Croix, leaving them with massive debts. Not long after, Rachel contracted a lethal fever, which she communicated to Alexander. She died of the fever while holding her sick 12-year-old boy in her arms. Hamilton suddenly found himself at 12 years old, an illegitimate orphan in poverty. So he had to go to work. He got a job at a trading charter, and he got his first education in finance, trade, and in the cruelty of slavery. When Alexander is 17, something else happens. A hurricane destroys the islands of St. Croix. He writes a letter about the destruction he witnessed, and it was so moving that a newspaper decided to publish it. And it was so impressive that the people of this island, even though they had just been devastated economically and physically by the hurricane, decided to raise funds to send him to America to get his education. So that's how he gets off the island. He uses the power of his words, his writing, to literally write himself off the island. And he finds himself in New York City in the fermenting politics of Revolutionary War. In New York, he meets the people who will shape his future. John Lawrence, the Marquis de Lafayette, Hercules Mulligan, and Aaron Burr. Burr and Hamilton are like oil and water, but they come together. They are revolutionaries together. They are lawyers together. They are soldiers together, politicians together. And in the end, one of them shoots the other. Not a moment. Hamilton was desperate not to throw away his shot. His energy and his intelligence was unavoidable. Everyone in New York knew about this young man. The early friends he made would shape the rest of his life. Everyone takes notice of Hamilton, including George Washington. He becomes Washington's aide-de-camp, similar to today's chief of staff. And today we think of the American victory in the Revolutionary War as a certainty, but it was anything but. The British sent 32,000 troops to New York Harbor alone to intimidate and overwhelm the ragtag colonial forces. Victory relied on amazing vision, faith, and the tenacity of some very determined individuals. Hamilton was one of them, and he was determined to prove his worth. He was determined to rise above his station, show the world that he was more than a bastard orphan and immigrant. With the fire in his belly, he uses the power of his pen and his words to rally Congress to get the supplies needed for our troops. He uses his connections and friends to win daring and important victories in the war. He works nonstop, writing, talking, learning, and creating. He becomes indispensable to George Washington. And he leapfrogs over other men, officers, gentlemen, who were in stations above him, including Aaron Burr. Hamilton is single-mindedly focused on creating something that will outlast him. But by all accounts, Hamilton was also girl crazy. Martha Washington, in fact, named her feral tomcat Alexander. True story. Throughout the Revolutionary War, Hamilton is not only seeking battlefield glory, he's seeking the woman of his dreams. Hamilton meets Angelica Schuyler, and everyone noticed how enamored, intense, and how powerful their connection was. Beautiful. Well done. While Alexander would end up marrying Eliza, Angelica's sister, both women remained important in his life, his work, and his legacy. It is also important to notice here how the Revolutionary War empowered and politicized women. It brought them to the forefront. It also did the same for enslaved people. All of a sudden they were able to join the army, and it became the issues of the day. What was being shifted and lifted by the American Revolution was consciousness. The world was turned upside down with the power of ideas, thoughts, and words. All men are created equal. That was and is an idea that we must constantly reaffirm in words, in our deeds, and in action. Today, more than ever. Speaking truth to power is not easy, and it does not make you popular. Hamilton seemed incapable of holding his tongue. Aaron Burr, in many ways, was the exact opposite of Hamilton. While Hamilton was an illegitimate orphan from the Caribbean, born into shame and misery, Aaron Burr was born into American aristocracy. He was going to live a very splendid life. But at 2 years old, both of his parents died. And then both of his grandparents and his sister died. So he's sent off to distant relatives, and eventually he attends Princeton College, graduating at 16 years old. In many ways, Burr was as much of a prodigy as Hamilton was. And it is one of the many strange parallels of these two men. And yet, they have very different reactions to their hardships. Burr sees what others get and he desires, and he keeps waiting for the perfect moment to jump in before he'll take action. Burr was cautious in the extreme.
Theodosia writes me a letter every day. I'm keeping her bed warm while her husband is away. He's on the British side in Georgia, trying to keep the colonies in line. Well, he can keep all of Georgia. Theodosia, she's mine. Love doesn't discriminate between the sinners and the saints. It takes and it takes and it takes. We keep loving anyway. We laugh and we cry and we break and we make our mistakes. If there's a reason, I'm by the side when so many have tried. I'm willing to wait for it. I'm willing to wait for it. My grandfather was a fire and brimstone preacher. But there are things that the homilies and hymns won't teach her. My mother was a genius. My father commanded respect. When they died, they left no instructions, just a legacy to protect. Death doesn't discriminate between the sinners and the saints. It takes and it takes and it takes. We keep living anyway. We rise and we fall and we break and we make our mistakes. And if there's a reason I'm still alive, when everyone who loves me has died, I'm willing to wait for it. I'm willing to wait for it. Wait for it. I am the one thing in life I'm in control. I am inimitable. I am an original. I'm not falling behind or running. I'm not standing still. I am lying in wait. Hamilton faces an endless uphill climb. He has something to prove. He has nothing to lose. Hamilton faces relentless. He wastes no time. What is it like in his shoes? Hamilton doesn't hesitate. He exhibits no restraint. He takes and he takes and he takes. He keeps winning anyway. He changes the game. He plays and he raises the stakes. Well, if there's a reason he seems to thrive when so few survive, and goddammit, I'm willing to wait for it. I'm willing to wait for it. Life doesn't discriminate between the sinners and the saints. It takes and it takes and it takes. We rise, break and fall. If there's a reason I'm still alive, when so many have died, then I'm willing to wait for it. Wait for it.
Burr's response to loss and to grief is powerful and not unlike many of us have done. To hold back. Hamilton's was just the opposite. He ran forward into trouble, into the action, rather than to wait. But Hamilton's singular focus and determination also got him into a lot of trouble and made more than a few enemies along the way. He does not certainly have pen's restraint of pen and tongue. Eventually, though, Hamilton gets into an altercation with Washington, and when he refuses to apologize, Washington dismisses him. Dejected and feeling like his success is eluding him, he returns home, where Eliza, who has been expecting him, is expecting.
Look at where you are. Look at where you started. The fact that you're alive is a miracle. Just stay alive, that would be enough. And if this child shares a fraction of your smile or a fragment of your mind, look out, world, that would be enough. Don't pretend to know the challenges you are facing, the world you keep erasing and creating in your mind. But I'm not afraid. I know who I married, so long as peace of mind. If you could let me inside your heart, oh, let me be a part of the narrative in the story they will write someday. Let this moment be the first chapter where you decide to stay. And I could be enough, and we could be enough, and that would be enough.
Eliza, in so many ways, was Hamilton's rock, his strength. And as we'll see in Act 2, the reason we know about it today. Never one to give up, though, Hamilton uses this time away to write non-stop, corresponding with friends, with colleagues, advancing the colonial goals. And Washington, ever the founding father, shared with Hamilton the hard-learned lessons of his life. You have no control over who lives, who dies, and who tells your story. By telling Hamilton of his own faults, Washington lets him see his missteps, his regrets. And Hamilton is able to see what's possible. That how every turn in your path can be turned to your advantage when you're willing to learn the lesson from it. Washington brings Hamilton back. But Hamilton keeps badgering Washington until the general finally gives him a field command and a chance for battlefield glory at Yorktown. Hamilton does not waste his shot.
The Battle of Yorktown, 1781. Monsieur Hamilton,
Monsieur Lafayette,
in come as where you belong.
how you say no sweat? We're finally on the field, we've had quite a run.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
So what happens if we win?
I go back to France, I bring freedom to my people if I'm given the chance.
We'll be with you when you do.
Go, lead your man.
See you on the other side.
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Hey, you're just like my country, I'm young, scrappy and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot.
Till the world turns upside down.
Till the world turns upside down.
Hamilton leads a bayonet charge. He and his men rise out of the trenches under the glare of bursting shells. They take over a British parapet, a British fortification, and in 10 minutes they have taken the enemy position. Hamilton, who had dreamed of battlefield glory his whole life, finally had it.
After a week of fighting, a young man in a red coat stands on a parapet.
We lower our guns as he frantically waves a white handkerchief.
And just like that it's over, we tend to our wounded, we count our dead.
Black and white soldiers wonder alike if this really means freedom.
Not yet.
We negotiate the terms of surrender. I see George Washington smile.
We escort their men out of Yorktown. They stagger home single file. Tens of thousands of people flood the streets. There are screams and church bells ringing. And as our ballin' foes retreat, I hear the drinking song they're singing. The world turned upside down. 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 Down, down, down. Freedom for America! Freedom for France!
were still skirmishes going on all over, but for all intensive purposes, the war was over at Yorktown. The impossible had happened. The world superpower, the British, had been defeated by this downtrodden, insignificant ragtag colonies. These brilliant, determined, and committed men and women had turned the world upside down by believing that they could. Each and every one of them fell short in their ideals. These men who wrote the words, "All men are created equal," owned other people. They made choices that disenfranchised Africans, ethnic minorities, and women, that terrorized the native people of this land. They, like you and I, fall far short of perfect. They were willing to hold up an ideal, though, to a goal, and call it worthy. To fight for opportunity, to try and to fail, daring greatly. This is our call today, especially today. When leaders, kings, presidents, and politicians will tell us that the other doesn't matter, that the other is evil and deserves to be excluded, deserves to be tortured, deserves to be derided. Today, we get to hold up a bigger eternal truth. So much human blood has been shared for this principle that we call America. Each and every one of us is endowed by our Creator. We are each and every one a divine blessing, God's perfect creation. Irrespective of place of birth, or circumstance of birth, or color, or gender, irrespective of everything. Our inalienable right is for life, liberty, and the pursuit of our dreams, goals, and happiness. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, the kids of Stoneman Douglas High School. You, and me. Each and every one of us can turn the world upside down if we have the faith and the courage to stick to our convictions, to say what's difficult to say, to speak truth to power, to each other, and to the world. The continuing spiritual lessons of the American Revolution are right here, right now. This is a revolution of thought, a revolution of consciousness, a consciousness of the world turned upside down.
The world